The landscape of late-night, early-morning television can be a grim, desolate place. Tell you how many times I found myself awake at 4 a.m. watching an infomercial for something like boner vacuums or facial cleansers, and asking myself, why am I watching this? Where did I go wrong in my life? I think television has become a lot more dull in recent years because everything is held under such tight reins by the sponsors, which everything has been monitored like it is. People can't get away with things like they used to. Maybe that's a good thing. But if one has the spare time and is willing to wade through the crap, there's an occasional kernel of interest to be found. From my experiences, I usually come across these in the public access, international and religious channels. The show I'm going to talk about now of the is of the third verity. It was a little humble show by the name of Faith Buddies, a show featuring interactions between children and puppets along with the Bible stories and songs. Not terribly well made or ambitious. It was a little more than a second-rate Sesame Street and Bible lessons thrown in. You ever seen things like Junior Christian Science Bible Lesson or Wiser Family Puppets? It's sort of that show with a similar unnerving feel to it, much like Sesame Street, except it leaves you very mildly uncomfortable. But that's not to say it didn't have its own unique quality, did it? Boy, did it ever. It stuck to its basic idea, unlike JCSBL. It didn't have the evoke the feeling of everything that is in the show that it's being the product of one crazy person. There had to be at least 3 different crazy people involved in the productions of Faith Buddies. It was definitely a low-budget venture, constrained in both monetary and creative sense. The thing about the show caught my attention was the characters and, unique, that tone that Faith Buddies had. I've heard that message itself is less important than the way in which it's conveyed. Faith Buddies seem to be this as one of its core principles. As such, its content was largely the same as other shows of this kind, but it lacked the typical softening to make it more palatable for younger audiences. Bible stories were told by means of a narration of combat with a slideshow colored pencil images, which would sometimes display graphic imagery in accordance with the story, like Cain's murder of Abel. They didn't skimp on the blood like most do. People drowning in the story of Noah's Ark, the plague of Egypt, especially this one, trails of Jobs, and the numerous appearances of Satan, not actually graphic, but more nobly darker and more serious than the other depictions. They didn't censor the words either. If you kept a keen ear, you'd sometimes hear bastard or ass, always in biblical context, of course, but it catches your attention, though I suppose in this current time where 7-year-olds play games like Resident Evil, none of this is all that shocking. So about the characters, first there's the main character of sort. It's Pinky. Oh god, Pinky, where do I start? Imagine Kermit without his neck frill, with a big lumpy head and colored pink. That's basically Pinky. Also, most notable was his eyes. His pupils were slightly too small and unfocused. Normally, this wouldn't be important, except that they liked to end the show by zooming in on Pinky's face. The character was referred to as a he, but I can never tell whether his voice actor was a man or a woman. Either way, they gave Pinky a bizarre voice, and it didn't help that he often would give his sentences a painfully drawn-out delivery at random. I can only guess that this was done to ensure to get the dumb kids, the dumb kids get it, as Pinky had a tone bordering on the condensing. Pinky was like the alpha puppet and was gravitated around. Whether one of the kids or the puppets had a question, they would turn to Pinky for his insight, though Pinky was typically shown with the Bible and would give verses most of the time. There would be other times where he didn't mention the Bible at all and seemed to giving answers a whim. The first thing that caught my attention about the show was Pinky's character had a distinct lack of warmth or empathy, which only got worse as the show continued. Pinky would give answers, but they would be very blunt and strangely defensive. Questions about hardships were swiftly answered with things like, be careful with questions like that, or don't question in God's way. Pinky was very fond of the latter statement, as it would be of his way of telling people to shut up. The other two puppets were Bertie and Gerda. There were others that would show up when needed, but these were the main three that were present for every episode. Bertie was a blue hippo, and Gerda was a green fuzzy bird. They were both a little more than dim-witted idiots whose sole purpose was to be the foil of Pinky. They would get into curious about something to come to faulty conclusions. The kids would take them to Pinky and set their dumb asses straight. Pinky would give them the weird, disjointed lecture, as they would change their opinion. Pinky also doesn't shy away from making cheap shots at the kids, but they didn't dare to challenge him. Except for one, the time where Greta called him a smarty pants, that this was met not with any verbal response, but merely a cold, hateful glare. I wouldn't think a scene between the two puppets not speaking would make me feel uneasy, but it did. Faith buddies became a guilty pleasure for me. As much of an asshole as Pinky it was, I couldn't help but amused by the guts this little puppet had. Pinky would tell it like it is from his perspective, regardless of whether his words were appropriate or any sense. He just did not give a fuck whether he offended people or not. This was evident in this homosexual episode. Yes, they had an episode about gays, a delicate subject that were treating all subtly of a hammer on glass, Sodom and Gomorrah, drawings of bearded men, French kissing, Leviticus 2 minutes 2013, Davis statics regarding AIDS and a whole shebang. Pinky went so far to suggest that prison was a mass conspiracy concocted by Satan to turn men gay. It was funny that up until the end was where this little girl was talking to Pinky about her older brother, who recently come out to his brother. Pinky proceeds to scroll at her about how much he was a sinner F-word that destined for hell, leaving the poor girl on the verge for tears. That was when I started to really question the intent behind the story. It was always a little odd, but the latter episodes became quite violent and mean-spirited. This would accumulate in the episode's shows. Along with everything else, even the way Faith Buddies started an episode was strange. It would feature Pinky asking questions like, how do you feel about, before saying, today we're going to talk about, followed by a black title card saying like words like guilt or forgiveness in white font. Yet the word for the last episode was predestination, and right from that moment I had this feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. I had seen other kids' show touch on controversial subjects like homosexuality and sin, although briefly and with a lot more tact, but I never ever seen a children's show focus or mention predestination before. I must admit, I was really curious to where they were going with this. I would have known better. The episode started the same as any others, but Bertie mentions, as he heard called predestination, talked about it with Gerda and some other kids. A lot of goofiness and dicking around with musical numbers and such. Then they go ask Pinky about it. Pinky reacted to his concept in an entirely too pleased manner, unlike anything else seen before. A little boy asks him to clarify what it means, and he's told. Some people are destined for heaven, and some are destined for hell, and rambles about the power of God. Didn't Jesus die to save everyone? And Pinky replies, he died for the chosen ones. The other children gradually begin to grasp to the gravity to this and become visibly afraid. The same boy asks him, how do people know where they are predestined to go? Pinky tells him, you won't know for sure until you die. But if you look deep in your hearts, you just might find the answer. Pinky then stares at the screen and everything comes to him. I thought the show was over, but another title card comes up. There's no redemption for the damned. Another slideshow of an illustration appears, but there's no Bible story or moral this time. Just a glimpse of what the viewer has in store for them if they're not chosen. A man and woman hugging each other before being burned. People with their feet chained to the ground being eaten by martyring devils whose mouth spans their entire body, with their bodies being ripped from their feet. People being impaled by spiked pillars by flying devils. People in the lake of fire having their bodies burnt or regenerated forever. Giant deformed creatures fighting and gouging out each other's eyes. The accompanying music is spliced with sounds of screaming and painful cries with intermittent whips from Pinky, such as, this is the wrath of the Lord, and it makes me happy to see the sinners get what they deserve. This horror is thankfully cut short a few minutes. Yet another abrupt cuts. This time the credits started rolling. The scene is zoomed out to the whole set, including lights, cameras, and microphones. The kids and the puppets are nowhere to be seen. A man in a black hood enters the room, proceeds to douse everything in gasoline before setting it aflame. The cameraman follows him out, and the last scene shows the black-hooded man, and the cameraman is laughing as they toss the puppets in the show into the furnace, with the final shot being a close-up of the burning Pinky puppet. It hasn't been that long since I saw the last episode, but I've yet to find any answers as to what the intent of the show really was, or ended that way. I had some random guesses that it might have been covert parody all along, or perhaps the show's founders got their funding cut, and this is why their way of getting back, or maybe were just crazy. I really don't know. So yeah, that was Faith Buddies. A Christian show, lost Christian show, creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story? I think it was a pretty good story, like really dark, because in the Bible there's some actually pretty like messed up shit you would expect from the Bible. Maybe even like, I don't know, say like, especially with words such as and yeah, like this, and don't forget about the homosexually episode where it's actually pretty fucked up. And guess what? And what I hate about it is that people just point you out for being like imagine being, like, they point you out being gay and call you a sinner and say that you go to hell for no reason, which is just absolutely messed up. Now, my final thought. Basically, this story was pretty dark. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty well made. I'll take it that. It's pretty, like especially with a man and hugging each other before being burned. Like, good God, that is pretty disturbing, pretty dark. Nonetheless, yeah, I think this pretty much explains a lot about Christianity. I don't know. I'm not against it or anything, but this story was pretty messed up, pretty creepy. I will say that. My final thoughts on the story. My rating of the story, I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10. Really good, really well made. Pretty disturbing, pretty dark.